And truly, that's what the takeaway of this weekend will be. And it will maybe change how Iowa views football at the University of Iowa. Welcome back to the ANF Podcast, where we cover Iowa sports. Today's episode is going to have a little bit different feeling than it usually does. My twin is not here today. He just got married, so he's on his honeymoon. So it's just me and my swarm beer for now. But it's going to have the same format as previous episodes. We're going to do a quick breakdown of the Purdue game that we just watched. Then we're going to do a preview of the Wisconsin game and with some picks as well. The Purdue game was a big time win for this program and for this season. It really keeps the dream alive. It keeps expectations high still for Iowa. And it felt very familiar from the previous 3 years Iowa's been competing. Essentially had zero QB play throughout the entire game. But from the 2020 season until now, that's been kind of a par for the course for Iowa football. All right, now let's break down how the offense did against Purdue. I think my main takeaway, like the most positive point I can take from this, is that Eric All is just in line with the rest of the tight ends and tight end U at Iowa. I can't really name a more impactful and more valuable player in the Big Ten, honestly, on any team. The value that he provides, play-to-play basis and a game-to-game basis. If Iowa didn't have Eric All, I don't know what the game plan would be on a consistent basis. It's not only that nearly every passing play is scripted for him. It's also the use of him in the run game through motion or through power sets. I find it hard to find any skill player outside of a QB that is as valuable as Eric All is to Iowa. So I think one key positive too, a much maligned guy, Brian Ferentz, actually had a great game plan for this game. His use of motion and counters really disrupted the Purdue defense, really confused their assignments, and it generated Iowa's actually two strongest runs of the game in very key moments. The Caleb Johnson touchdown run in the first quarter was an outside zone play to the left, and it had Eric All motioning behind the line. And the actually defender that was manned up on Eric All left play side, completely, didn't see the run coming and ran himself out of the play. And so when you watch the motion happen in the outside zone, you anticipate there to be a free running defender, probably around A or B gap, and he's just gone. And Caleb obviously has open space, and he does what Caleb does in those situations, and he scores. But it was just a great design by Brian. And you consistently saw that motion all game, either through power and counter concepts. You'd see a tight end come from behind the line, or any outside zone concept, you'd see Eric All in motion behind the line as well, kind of scooping that backside D end. And then the use of counters and power. I'm guessing what they saw on film and why they employed this as the game plan for this game against Purdue was Purdue loved to slant a lot. Obviously, you're in a 5 front, so you're consistently trying to gap everything up and let your middle linebacker and safety fill the 2 holes that you're leaving open. But the counters they used and how consistently we were able to use power counters to generate strong runs was such a credit to Brian's game plan. The overall scope of this, it's starting to look a lot more like John Budmeier's offense at Wisconsin under Paul Chryst. And even the touchdown to Eric All when he came as a fullback and then they ran play action on third down and short on Purdue side of the field. It's actually a play that Wisconsin ran against us in 2018. And that kind of used as a fullback and using them in versatile ways and kind of utilizing them to, have horrible assignments against linebackers. That's very much Paul Chryst and very much Bud Meier. So it's interesting that now that we're, essentially a year and a half into Bud Meier being on the staff, Kirk and Brian are really utilizing his playbook and his scripts. And it looked really rough when it first started. I remember the Iowa State game last year. Every time we try to do a motion into a kickout block with a tight end and a guard pulling behind it, it just looked sloppy. It would hit so late. There would be play side power, and the down block would never hit. And these guys would be so disjointed coming through behind pulling. And now it just looks like a completely different offense of running this consistent power counter. And it's really an exciting thing that Iowa could probably, have a new run game develop that is an outside zone. That could be the strength of this team. Iowa also got to welcome back Caleb Johnson. You forget how valuable a player he is. For a team that consistently has a hard time having consistent success, consistent ability to move the chains, having a guy that can turn a 50-yard run or a 40-yard run that we've seen from other backs at Iowa, like Patterson and Le'Shawn Nabel, finish those last 10 yards. The ability for Caleb to actually get those last 10 yards and complete the play and make an explosive touchdown, that's going to win Iowa probably a full game more than they win the season, just having him at running back. And the run game looked drastically different, in my opinion, with him back there. And I think the last positive I'd say for this game was the O-line play. We challenged them in the previous video, saying if Iowa was going to be successful this season, they had to step up. They had to play a standard deviation of where they've played so far this season. And they did. They played a great game. I think it was their best run game of the season. I still feel like they struggled a little bit in pass protection throughout the game. But the push they generated through double teams and the counter looks that we gave is really strong to see, Iowa could have success against a heavy front consistently. Purdue's defense was made to stop the run. They're consistently stacking the box with 5 real defensive line bodies. You're not seeing 240-pound DNs, and you're seeing really big body linebackers as well. And Iowa really can move guys the entire game. And it was a great sign, sign of life from the Iowa offensive line that I've been backing the offseason. I had expectations for all season, and they seem to be filling that a little more. There is still a concern that, maybe Purdue just blew some really easy assignments. As I mentioned, the kind of jet motion really threw them off in some situations. But it was still a good sign to see them get that push consistently and have a lot of kind of over-the-top wins from their linemen. And I kind of break this down each week, focused on positives, negatives for offense and defense. And one key point about Iowa's offense that I saw on Twitter was kind of a topic of discussion was how everyone focuses on our conservative play calling nature at the end of the game. And when we're up by 6 points and we have the opportunity to lose if we kick the ball back, and we run 3 straight times and end up giving Purdue 2 minutes left with the ball. My stance on it is that Iowa has only been burned on that once. So what I mean is that coming into that possession, Kirk's main focus and main idea was to eliminate their timeouts, so running on first and second down, and then eliminating seconds on the clock. And their defense knows that's the objective. And I was, pretty, by their formations, was showing that that's what they wanted to do. Probably should have picked up the first down on the third down play call. Williams just saw it backside. I think he, had previous runs in the last few games that have actually worked backside in that situation. He should have followed it strong side. It would have got the first down. But I'm okay with it. I'm okay with that tactic because Iowa's actually, you look back from, I can think of all the games from 2020 to now. Iowa's burned on it one time in 2021 in the bowl game against Kentucky. And that's obviously if Wan'Dale Robinson and Levis, who are both making money in the NFL right now, on the offensive side of the ball. But you think back to all the situations where Iowa has had a conservative nature in the last few minutes of the game and kicked back with less than 2 minutes, no timeouts, and 80 yards to go. I can probably name 4 examples, clear examples where the team didn't even cross midfield. Like Nebraska 2021, they did cross midfield. Minnesota 2019, if we want to go back even farther. Northwestern 2021. But there's a myriad of examples over Iowa the last 3 years where Kirk trusting his defense in that situation it's the right move. Because when you eliminate timeouts from the offense and you eliminate their ability to huddle up after plays and really have different play calls other than a 2-minute drill, in the college world, those QBs aren't talented enough to make those plays. What separates NFL QBs from college QBs, and even the good NFL QBs, is the 2-minute drill. And Kirk is consistently putting the onus on the other team's QB to make plays in that situation. And he's betting the right side of that flip. It is frustrating. It is stressful to be the Iowa fan, seeing your team kick back with 2 minutes after you had the game locked up, it felt like, for the majority of the game. But truly is the right move. And he's betting that those guys can't make the plays, and generally they don't. And I think one last point I like to make with that is when you eliminate their ability to call timeout, you are in hurry-up mode for the rest of the game. So you're either spiking it or calling a hurry-up play. And your amount of plays you have in that situation are so limited. Like a college hurry-up offense for the majority of teams, it has to be like a subset of 20 plays max. And the route trees have to be very simple. You're most likely eliminating any run plays. Your D linemen are getting a pressure, the entire time. They're pinning their ears back and rushing. And so they're really in the defense is in probably the most advantageous spot it is all game. And that's what Kirk knows. And he really lives by that rule. Is I'd rather eat up timeouts and minutes and seconds than I would of, making sure we just get the first down and win the game. All right, now moving on to the negatives of the Iowa offense. And Connor does have one contribution to this episode. We have to refer to Deacon Hill as McDeacon for the rest of the season and for this episode. It's his nickname. He's trademarking that nickname, McDeacon. It felt like a throwback to Petrus and the bad games of Stanley to watch Deacon play. Really lacked accuracy in crossing routes and throws over the middle. Clearly has only a fastball in his arsenal. He's reaching back for, 100 mile per hour throw, it feels like, every time he throws. We saw issues with letting plays develop. Caleb Johnson in the flats with the easy check down and, threw it too early. The third down crossing routes in the goal line, threw a ball that, it felt like he should have waited another 2 count for those receivers to pass. One positive I'd say about him is that he really withstood pressure well. As I mentioned before, the O-line really struggled to kind of block Purdue's rush defenders. He threw through contact and he threw through pressure in his face pretty well. Another positive for him as well is his deep ball looked good. I think, Kirk has an affinity for a strong arm and a QB that can throw the ball a mile. And that's what we've seen since 2017. But that deep ball does help. He had 3 throws over 20 yards, and it reminded me so much of Petrus, where it feels like the guys with the bigger arms and kind of throw through their shoulder and their elbow more rather than their wrist. Their accuracy actually comes into play when the ball is about 15 plus yards downfield. And he had some very good throws from that range. And I'd say the last negative would be just receivers. I think with Deacon as a starting QB now, you're going to see Iowa almost completely move away from throwing the receivers the ball for more, maybe 10 times a game. And that's just to keep him honest. His accuracy issues, obviously the receivers aren't, large targets. They're all below 6 feet tall and kind of slight guys and don't get a lot of separation. I think the guy we saw get targeted a few times and actually had that carom that went off his face is Seth Anderson. I think we'll still see him consistently targeted, but my guess is that receivers going forward will most likely just be through bubble screens or maybe slant routes, which he kind of has a good ability to throw. But I think receivers, there's already some tweets and some stats going out that we have like 16 less completions to receivers than Army. Those are going to become even more drastic over the next few weeks. So moving on to the Iowa defense. I think this was Iowa's secondary's best game of the year. And it really had a different flavor of how Phil wanted to play the game. We've been asking him to cut down on the cornerbacks' depth in terms of how far they are off the receivers. You saw Cooper and Jamari both lining up off, 3 to 5 yards off the ball rather than 7 like we saw against Penn State and Michigan State. And really challenging Purdue and Hudson Card to push the ball downfield. And with who we anticipate, the receivers in the Big Ten West and QB play in the Big Ten West for going forward, I anticipate Iowa to have a consistent strategy that they're going to continue to have that cornerback depth of around 2 yards on the far side of the field or anything that's, on the opposite hash. Or you're going to have, maybe a 5 yard depth and for anyone on play side. And maybe if they still want to have Jamari have that ability to, get back easier. It really benefited Iowa. You had Purdue taking deep shots and I think they drew 1 PI penalty and didn't connect on any of them. I hope Iowa continues to push this button because it's truly the strength of Iowa's defense is Cooper and Jamari. And Jamari's, he's still been a hard time getting to full speed and kind of late on his pedal to actually extending himself and getting back. But Cooper is obviously the best player on our team. So use him to your advantage. If you have a strength like that, force teams to target him. And by putting him 2 yards off the ball, you are essentially making him a target of every play. And so I want to see Phil continue to do that. And now that we're on the topic of Cooper, obviously take him for granted now. You start thinking about actually how many games we have left with him. It might be 8 games. For the rest of his Iowa career. One thing, that goes unnoticed is just he had, I think, 2 catches, maybe 3 of punts within the 10-yard line and then returned them 15 yards. And the hidden yardage that provides and the value that provides to an offense as a hard time moving the ball is just massive. And it really changed, the flow of this game could have been much different if Purdue would have found that hidden yardage in their punt game. They put 2 in the end zone and I think Cooper caught 2 within that 10-yard line. If all 4 of those are down to like Iowa, and this game has a very different feel to it. But Iowa really won the special teams game in that sense, not in the kicking game, obviously, that we had, 2 misses and they only had 1 miss. But in the punting sense, that hidden yardage really changed the flow of this game a lot. And all credit to Cooper for making those plays. Another key positive for Iowa's defense was the ability to actually have a serviceable pass rush in this game. I'd say I'm still not convinced that Iowa developed one. They felt more like covered sacks. But Iowa consistently, and what it will for the rest of the year and what Phil's really built his defensive line pressure on is containing the pocket. So you are, rather than having your DNs get upfield and attacking the outside shoulders of offensive linemen, you see them employ bull rushes where they're actually kind of, coming straight on linemen's faces and trying to push them right back. And they're trying to avoid the classic QB scramble, which comes through the guard and the guard and the tackle. And Iowa's done a great job of that all year, of truly pressing the pocket through the bull rush, not really concerned with winning the pass rush, but actually moving the pocket to a point where, he's got 3 or 4 linemen in his face when he's making the throw. The QBs are. And that might be the move this year. You really need to have everyone bull rushing in this situation because there's not a true pass rusher on this team. Herkett, Craig, and Evans just can't employ consistent pass rush moves that really you can count on to win. If you can't, expect them to have that type of win on a consistent basis. So that might be, how Iowa goes forward. And considering the amount of athletes that Iowa actually plays at QB this year, which it feels like every team Iowa plays the remaining in their schedule actually has an athlete at QB, that kind of pressure and that kind of consistent bull rush of containing the pocket might be the move going forward. Obviously, another big development in Iowa football is Noah Shannon is anticipated to return to the team this week. The NCAA is going to lift his ban, and it's going to add another key player to maybe Iowa's, we mentioned secondary is one of Iowa's best position groups in corner. D tackle has been exceptional all year. It was exceptional again in this game. Logan Lee, Black, and Graves have played unreal so far. And now you add in Noah Shannon, who, the depth that provides, it's going to be massive for the rest of the year. And I anticipate we're going to actually see Graves shift over to the 3-tech position. So he's going to actually back up Logan Lee now. And you're going to see Shannon either start or back up Black, depending on how they want to handle it. I'm guessing he's going to come in a backup sense. But Jeremiah Pittman's played, had a great season so far, hasn't really shown up as any negatives. He's probably going to get sat down in this situation. But considering your 4 D tackles now as those 4, it's going to be an extreme strength for Iowa going forward.
We are happy to announce a new sponsor for the ANF Podcast. The ANF Podcast is sponsored by Eye Surgeons Associates, proudly serving Eastern Iowa and Western Illinois for all your eye care needs for over 40 years.
All right, now into previewing the Wisconsin-Iowa game. It really is an interesting game, not just for the season, because it probably is the West Division Championship for all intents and purposes, but also the hierarchical in their embracement of the dairy raid, as people are calling it, and the embracing of essentially running 11 personnel and having a spread offense move into Wisconsin. It really puts the onus on Iowa to prove that they still have a winning formula. Iowa's entire program is based on we're basically going to eliminate the QB position from how we recruit and eliminate the receiver position as well. And we're not going to account for those things. They're not going to help us win on a consistent basis. So our offense and philosophy of how he plays is not going to be focused on attracting those type of players. And what Wisconsin's doing is the exact opposite. They're creating an offense where they're going to be able to show, hopefully high score amounts, hopefully show an offense that a QB wants to play for, and they already attracted one in Mordecai, as well as attract receivers to come play for Wisconsin because they're going to get 40 to 50 catches a year. And those things already happen. You bring in Mordecai at QB. We also bring in, 3 high-end receivers that Wisconsin was able to grab in the transfer portal. You bring in Pauling, you bring in Bryson Green, and you bring in CJ Williams. And those guys are from USC, Oklahoma State, and Cincinnati. High-end, receiver programs, maybe, the Oklahoma State and Cincinnati, but they were still bigger recruits, and the fact they could attract them to Wisconsin is not normal. And really now they have a very deep receiver room. You add Bell into that and DK, and you truly have 5 guys that they all look the part. They all look like 4 stars or high 3 stars. And it's really a new age in Wisconsin football. And I think the Iowa AD will be very interested in how this game plays out. It's truly a clash of new age and old age in Big Ten football. And if Kirk can go in there, he has an unreal opportunity to really make his point, improve the idea of his program, that eliminating the quarterback and receivers from your offense and focusing on tight ends, offense, and offensive line and running backs. It can't be understated how important it is for Kirk to win this game. Not just for, the sake of, the Big Ten West title this year, but also the grand scope of this program and the grand scope of where he's driven it to and where it currently sits. I was critical of Fickell's idea to run this offense, but they are 18 of 18 in the red zone before the Rutgers week and red zone efficiency touchdowns. You'd anticipate a spread offense couldn't generate that, but they're more efficient than any team in the country in the red zone. They're running the ball at an incredible clip. You have Braylon Allen at over 6 yards a carry. Malusi's at over 6 yards a carry. Obviously, Malusi's not around anymore. He has a season injury, but truly they're doing things that Iowa wish they could do with their spread offense. And you also had the ability to attract a pretty dynamic QB as well. So it's not just a battle for the West title. It's a battle of philosophy. It's a battle of how to build your program. And truly, that's what the takeaway of this weekend will be. And it will maybe change how Iowa views football at the University of Iowa. Can we adopt a system like this going forward? So as I broke down, the new OC for Wisconsin is from UNC. He coached Sam Howell and Drake May. Now he's coaching Mordecai in this offense. Breaking down their film and watching the majority of their games, the receivers that they've added are, they're real players. You throw on the film, they're all 6'2", 210. They run well, they catch well, they can have contested catches, they run crisp routes. But none of them truly will scare Iowa. I think the guy that will utilize the most will be Pauling in the slot. Similar to how Purdue used their kind of scatty receivers in Sheffield against Castro. I'm guessing Pauling on out routes and slant routes will be the main target for Wisconsin in the passing game. They've essentially eliminated the tight end position in this new offense. The two tight ends, have been sparingly used, probably have less than 10 catches each on the year, and really are non-factors in this game. You might see them a little bit when they want to run power. They'll bring two of them in to kind of run a power concept, how their shotgun look. But it's a weird feeling to have a Wisconsin team, most recently have Jake Ferguson, manning that position, to not be using their tight ends. So it's kind of odd to watch. The old line for Wisconsin is very good. And as expected, they have a former 5-star at left tackle, and the rest of the line is fairly old and consistently wins. And I think the thing they do the best is actually pass protection. Outside of the Washington State game, they had 2 critical strip sacks in that game. Mordecai has a bunch of time to throw, consistently has a clean pocket. Their run game it has its ups and downs, but it consistently moves the ball. You can't really blame Wisconsin's offense for not having consistent success, and I think their run game will have success against Iowa as well. Truly, it's a very similar offense that we just played in Purdue. And Mordecai is a step up in over Hudson Card. I feel like Hudson Card really had issues with the decision-making and understanding when he should have pulled it down and ran. Mordecai is a little more of a straight line runner than Hudson Card was. Card had the ability to kind of move more laterally, and Mordecai's, doesn't have that ability. But they will use him in QB reads. They'll QB draw him occasionally, and he'll scramble on third down. So he's a true dual threat. As I brought up in the preview, I anticipate Iowa to consistently focus on containing the pocket, not generating pass rushes, but keeping Mordecai in the pocket through the bull rushes that they've implemented. And I still consistent. I think that'll be the focus over getting sacks. I'll be keeping him in the pocket just because his legs actually are dangerous. He probably runs, a low 4.7 or high 4.6 40. In terms of him throwing the ball, he struggles with the deep throw consistently. Any throw over 20 yards at a vertical shot, I probably can count on my hand the ones he've actually hit. They will press it, though. They will throw that ball just like Purdue will, and I think we'll see Iowa have success stopping that. But I do anticipate, as we talked in the preview as well, cornerbacks are going to have less depth this game. I think we're going to really want them to throw that ball consistently against Cooper and Jamari, and I anticipate that we'll have them lined up around 2 to 5 yards again depth and challenging Mordecai to hit the deep ball against us consistently. And they will throw out to Bell. They'll throw it to Bryson Green. I've seen maybe one deep shot to DK, but none of those guys are true burners. They don't really have that deep threat shot. And it kind of is like the entire scope of Wisconsin receivers. Like they all can play, but like I don't anticipate any of these guys to make the NFL. Last guy to highlight is Braylon Allen, the running back. Might be, you bring up Eric All as the MVP of the Big Ten West. He might be the best skill position player in the West as well, in the Big Ten as a whole. Just a great job of fighting through contact. Caleb Johnson could really learn a thing from him about keeping his balance through contact and kind of keeping, less of a tilt when he runs because he can bounce off stuff easily. And he still has the ability to house call. It seems like he's lost a step in his overall speed. Seen him get run down a few times this season, but just an incredible player. Always finds hidden yardage, and anticipate him to probably have 3 or 4 runs this game where you just haven't seen that against Iowa this year in terms of running back talent. And obviously Katron Allen and Singleton were great backs, but Braylon Allen might be the cream of the crop there. All right, moving on to the Wisconsin defense. When you break down this defense, you really don't see the classic linebacker defenders you've seen over the last few years. Going back to Watt, Beagle, Schobert at the defensive end position, and Herbig last year, you don't see that true pass rusher at defensive end for Wisconsin, as well as you don't see really their middle linebacker presence they've had in past years as well. You think of back to TJ Edwards and plenty of other guys, Chenal, Dooley, and they just don't seem like they had their linebacking core they've had in past years. And that leads to them being a little more susceptible on defense than they have in the past. they're still running a very similar defense than they ran in previous years. It's a 4-2-5. They consistently have stand-up DNs. They run more zone than they did in the past. They're more of a heavy man-to-man scheme in past years, but more zone this year. Main takeaways, they're still a very good defense. I think it still is going to finish in the top 25. In total defense, against Rutgers, they really stopped the run. Purdue never really had a flow until the game was out of reach. I anticipate Iowa to have some success because it's actually the first time they've played a power scheme all year. Wisconsin's 5 previous opponents all ran spread. And, when you don't really play against a power scheme consistently, you're not used to, a lot of power concepts and counter concepts with down blocks that they're going to see this week. Obviously, these guys have played against Iowa in the past and, were recruited to play more against these type of offenses, but they still haven't seen it this year. And so I think Iowa will move the ball on the ground more than in past years against Wisconsin. But I think the overall success of the offense, it's just without a true passing threat, we'll have a hard time overall in the game. Similar to the front 7 for Wisconsin in terms of their defensive sets, or actually front 6. Their secondary is just, probably the strength of their team is their safety play with Latu and Wohler. But their cornerbacks were kind of lightly recruited guys. You don't feel like they're, the caliber that Wisconsin's had in the past as well. But I just don't envision Iowa moving the ball consistently. Purdue had some major breakdowns in terms of just assignment football they were playing. I haven't seen that from Wisconsin the last few games. I think their D tackle play is actually very strong. Even though they ran the ball on a few times this year, it still feels like those guys are, it's a deep position group for them, and they do have some top end talent there. And I think to end it and just to have a final scope of how I anticipate this Iowa-Wisconsin game to go is Wisconsin will have more success, obviously having Mordecai at QB and Iowa having Hill. But I think the line of scrimmage that Iowa's had a distinct advantage in almost every game it's played other than Penn State won't be there. I think it will be a push in that regard. I think Iowa will win some and they'll lose some on offensive and defensive lines. And I think the overall scope of, Wisconsin being at home and, having their true QB will, be too much of a problem for Iowa in the long run. I envision this game, Wisconsin winning, 23-13. But I think Iowa keeps it close. I think as long as they don't make early mistakes on the road like they have in the past in these kind of bigger games, I think they'll keep it competitive. I think they'll, show some flashes to compete in this game. But in the end, Wisconsin's playing with a full deck, and Iowa's not with no Cade or Lachey. And I think they needed both those players to truly have a shot of winning this game. So to wrap it up, we're going to do some picks now. Connor's not here to gloat in his 4-0 victory from last week. It's the first time one of us has gone undefeated. And I went 1-1 with my picks. But for this week, as I mentioned, I anticipate Iowa to compete, but I'm actually going to take the under in the Iowa-Wisconsin game. I just view this game as both teams trying not to make a mistake, letting their defenses win the game. I think Wisconsin pulls away late, but I anticipate a low-scoring game. So that number hasn't come out yet on the sites I look at, but whatever it is, I'm taking it. And then my other pick will be Michigan State plus 5.5. Michigan State's going through a QB change right now. I think they've played really good football against Iowa. I think Kim made 2 critical errors in that game that lost it. I really like how they can run the ball. I think they're going to run the ball well against Rutgers, and I anticipate Rutgers to have a hard time actually moving the ball as well. Rutgers is really on a hard time moving the ball through the air, and I think they're going to run the ball not at an effective level to win that game. So give me Michigan State plus 5.5. Thank you for everyone for listening. We're going to have Connor back next week. He'll be back from his honeymoon, and we'll be back on our normal schedule. Thank you.